Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood is one of the most famous folk tales from France. The story was popularized by Charles Perrault in the 17th century, and its versions have been retold in many cultures. It teaches children important lessons about obeying parents, being cautious of strangers, and the dangers that can lurk in the world. Once upon a time, in a small village near the forest, there lived a sweet and kind girl who always wore a red cloak with a hood. Because of this, everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. She lived with her mother, and they were very happy. One day, her mother called her and said,
"Little Red Riding Hood, your grandmother is ill. Please take this basket of food and go visit her. But be careful. Don't talk to strangers and stay on the path."
Little Red Riding Hood was excited to visit her grandmother, who lived in a cottage deep in the forest. She happily took the basket and set off on her way, skipping down the path. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. As she walked, she saw beautiful flowers growing near the path and thought, "Grandmother will love these." While she was picking flowers, a big bad wolf appeared from the trees. The wolf, who was very hungry, saw the little girl and thought of a clever plan. He approached her and said,
"Good day, Little Red Riding Hood. Where are you going?"
Little Red Riding Hood, forgetting her mother's warning, answered politely, "I'm going to visit my grandmother. She's ill, and I'm bringing her this basket of food." The wolf smiled wickedly and asked,
"Where does your grandmother live?"
"In a cottage deep in the forest, just a little further down this path," she replied.
"Why don't you pick some more flowers for your grandmother?"
The wolf suggested.
"I'm sure she would love that."
Red Riding Hood thought that was a good idea, so she continued to pick flowers, unaware that the wolf was heading straight to her grandmother's house. The wolf arrived at the grandmother's cottage, knocked on the door, and called out in a sweet voice, "Grandmother, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood." The grandmother, who was weak and in bed, said,
"Come in, dear."
The wolf entered the cottage, and without hesitation, he gobbled up the poor grandmother. Then he put on her clothes, her nightcap, and her glasses. He jumped into her bed and pulled the covers up to his chin, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive. Short time later, Little Red Riding Hood knocked on the door and called out, "Grandmother, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood." The wolf, imitating the grandmother's voice, replied,
"Come in, my dear."
Little Red Riding Hood entered the cottage and went to her grandmother's bedside. She noticed something seemed strange. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have,"
"Won't the better to hear you with, my dear,"
said the wolf. "And, grandmother, what big eyes you have," she continued.
"Won't the better to see you with, my dear,"
said the wolf. "And grandmother, what big hands you have," she added.
"Won't the better to hug you with, my dear."
The wolf answered, "And grandmother, what big teeth you have," Little Red Riding Hood finally said, now feeling frightened.
"Oh, the better to eat you with,"
shouted the wolf as he jumped out of the bed and chased. Just as the wolf was about to catch Little Red Riding Hood, a woodcutter who was passing by heard her screams. He ran into the cottage and saw the wolf. Without hesitation, he grabbed his axe and hit the wolf, knocking him down. The woodcutter then cut open the wolf's belly and rescued Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, who was miraculously unharmed. And, relieved, Little Red Riding Hood hugged her grandmother tightly. The woodcutter, grandmother, and Little Red Riding Hood worked together to fill the wolf's belly with heavy stones. When the wolf woke up, he was so heavy that he could not move, and soon died. Grateful, Little Red Riding Hood promised her grandmother that she would never speak to strangers again and would always listen to her mother's advice. The grandmother, feeling much better, enjoyed the food Little Red Riding Hood had brought. From that day on, Little Red Riding Hood was always careful when she walked through the forest. And they all lived happily ever after.